Hello! Well, gosh, we haven't done one of these in a little while. That's because I went off and got married, and then I got ill, and then I went on holiday, and all sorts of things. But let's get back into it. Wherever put it? Wherever put it? Here it is. The Way of Kings. Oh, let's find out what the Way of Kings is today. Which way will the kings be going? Ah, right, yeah, so we're on Chapter 3, City of Bells now. Well, you're probably far ahead. I know that at least one of you has jumped ahead into the 40s, and at least another one of you, specifically my wife, has got through half the book so far, so I doubt we'll be catching up with her anytime soon. But anyway, let's see where we get to today. So, Chapter 3 begins in an unusual and interesting way. It begins with a series of drawings of flying eels. Bet you didn't see that coming, did you? Now, I'm not going to show you the drawings of flying eels because I'm concerned that this series of videos may be taken by some to be an alternative to reading the book, and I'm not interested in that. This is somewhere where those of us who have read the chapters discussed can go back over them and just see what we thought of them and share our thoughts on them, and so on and so on. That's what we're doing here. It's a little book club, little reading corner. So I hope you've read Chapter 3, City of Bells. Go away and do that if you haven't. Come back and we shall continue. We begin the chapter with another little quote from a dying person, this time 30 seconds before death. A cobbler of some renown. Must be the one with the elves. That's the only cobbler of any renown I can think of. And then we begin the chapter with a character whose name I suppose I don't know an official pronunciation of, but I'm guessing it's going to be a bit like Shalon. Emphasis on the second syllable and pronouncing it as an on rather than an an because it's American. This is an American book. She could be called Shallon, but something tells me she isn't. It sounds a lot like Sharon. No reason why she shouldn't have a name that sounds like Sharon. I just for some reason think that Shalon is more the sort of name that, you know, a writer like Brandon Sanderson's going to come up with. Plus I can very easily imagine it in Brandon Sanderson's voice. I know his voice quite well because I've listened to a lot of his podcasts and watched a lot of his videos. I know him more than I know his writing, really, when it comes down to it. Sorry about that, Brandon. First paragraph of the chapter, first thing we hear about is what Shallan expected her life to be like. The whole of the rest of the book is what she actually ends up with. She's expected to spend her early life sequestered in her family's manor, only escaping through the books of her father's library. She'd expected to marry one of her father's allies, then spend the rest of her life sequestered in his manor. That's not what happens. So she arrives in Kharbranth, known as the City of Bells, looking for somebody called Jasnar Kholin. Now, quick quiz, readers. Have we heard the name Kholin before? Genuine question, I can't remember if we've heard the name Kholin before. We're going to find out that the Kholin family, pretty much all of them, are really important in this book, and we're going to get to know them. But what we definitely know about the Kholin family, just from this chapter alone, is that Jasnar is the daughter of the king assassinated in the prologue by Seth. Remember him? So, assassinated king, his daughter is called Jasnar. Jasnar, surviving daughter of the king. So here we are in Kharbranth, and it's a huge, crushed up city, but with the heart of a picturesque seaside town, and it looks so nice that she takes a little memory of it, and it says what she does. She blinked pointedly, fixing the image of the city in her memory. Now, one of my sort of genre habits is the Horus Heresy series, as you can see. They're books about space marines, Warhammer 40,000 space marines. I've already mentioned the series when we were talking about power armor. And in that, there's a form of technology where there are certain people who've got this presumably implanted in their face somewhere, where they can blink click. And it doesn't really describe what that means, and well, perhaps it does, and it's just been that long since I read the book, but you blink in a certain way anyway, and that takes a picture. And that was what I was thinking of when I saw this, but of course this isn't the kind of setting where people would have technology implanted in their face, so it's not going to be that. But anyway, she's still pointedly, when she wants to make a memory of something, she kind of goes, and then she's got a memory. As we hear more about why this girl Shallan is arriving here in Kharbranth, we find out that her dad was a bit of a rogue when it comes to financial arrangements. He's made a number of business deals and offered a number of bribes, and then he's died before he's had the chance to pay them off. And they were a bit cheeky in the first place, so the rest of the family is left flapping about going, well, how are we going to get out of this? Well, I'll tell you how you're going to get out of this. You're going to be sold into slavery. That's how. You've got Shallan and her four older brothers, which are the remaining family now that her dad's died, and they're the estate, and they can't pay off his debts. And what happens when you can't pay off someone's debt? You don't go to debtor's prison like in Dickensian time. No, worse, whatever nearby family can afford to buy your estate, they do. They buy you along with the estate, and they put you into hard labour of some sort. You become their slave. So here we have this highborn family, or at least the surviving kids of this highborn family, about to be sold into slavery if they can't come up with something to save save their skin. And Shallan is on some kind of quest of that sort. In fact, it looks like Shallan is the only one out of the 5 siblings who can do anything about it at all. We don't know what it is she intends to do about it, but what we do know is that they're not telling anyone that their dad is even dead. They're just telling them that he's a bit of a recluse and he hasn't been seen in a while just because he's a bit like that. Something along those lines anyway, can't remember. I'll probably get there in a minute as I skim over the chapter. Well, we find out that Shallan's plan is to find this Jasnar Kholin and go, hello, I want to be your ward, so can you train me up to be your ward? And that's the plan. And we don't quite at this point know how that would work and why being a ward would help the situation that you are in, if you're in that particular situation, but we're going to find out, so just for now, let's carry on exploring this City of Bells. Actually, before we explore the City of Bells, we'll have a little bit of bants. We've got the captain of the ship that she's come in on, he's called Tozbek, and he's one of those chaps with the long eyebrows that we met before, in the form of Tuvlakv, who was the slaver. This one's called Tozbek, which is an easier name to say, but his wife is called Ashlv. You know, it's going well for a while, Ash, and then Ashl, you know, is it going to be Ashley? No, it's Ashlv. It's like you start saying a name and then you just swerve off into a different direction. Ashlv. It sounds like you zoom off into the distance really fast halfway through the name. Oh, hi, Ashlv. Of course I must apologise at this point if names like Ashv and Tuvlakv are actually taken from normal Earth languages that I simply don't speak. There are many of those and I'm extremely ignorant in quite a lot of them, and things generally. We see some Parshmen here and we learn a bit about them. Like the Parshmen her father had owned. These were stout and thick of limb, with their odd marbled skin, some parts pale or black, others a deep crimson. The mottled pattern was unique to each individual. So Parshmen, who I think we've met before, haven't we? I know about them, and that's because I'm far ahead in the book. Anyway, they're people who are owned in societies like the one Shallan comes from. Now, we heard earlier that the Vorin people have some strict rules about slave ownership, and here's someone whose father owned some people, and here are more of them carrying and lifting things and presumably slaves as well. And they've got this blotchy, mottled skin, and some of it is red, real blood red, maybe lighter than that, and then the rest is either pale or black. So, we're sort of looking at a race of Darth Mauls. Well, his facial patterns are quite deliberate. I don't actually know in Star Wars lore whether or not they are tattoos or painted on, or whether his skin is just like that. But with these people, you get the sense that it's a lot more of a sort of a flowing marble pattern type arrangement. Anyway, then we get a bit of banter between her and the captain. I think I've already mentioned that we get a bit of banter, but here's where we actually get it. And we find out that Shallan has a bit of an answer for everything. She has comebacks and little snappy quips just bubbling out of her at all times, but she bites a lot of them down because she actually kind of believes that you shouldn't be rude, and she seems to believe in a lot of the sort of social hang-ups and so on that she's been raised with. And it takes the captain of the ship to say, no, go on, we're all sailors here, you can say whatever you want, for her to get these little quips out. So we're learning a bit about Shallan in this chapter, and we seem to have a second name for her as well. It's Davar or Davar or Dava or something like that. I'm going to need a pronunciation guide on this one, please, anyone knows. And here's what we find out about her in this chapter. She's from high society, but she's not rich anymore, but nobody knows that. They're keeping it a secret. She's an artist. She's really good at sketching and sort of observing from life. She can have one look at one of those flying sky eels that we mentioned earlier, and she'll just be able to draw it exactly the way it is. She's a bit of a smart aleck, and I find her quips a bit tiresome, but I don't know if that's on her or on Brandon. But I like her though, and one of the things that he's done that's interesting here is that he has avoided the easy way of making her likeable, which would be to make her the one person of her class who doesn't hold all the various prejudices that everyone else in her high society has. No, she's got them. She thinks Parshmen are thick-headed. We know in the real world about how people who own slaves think about their slaves, and we know that they're not to be taken as true, and she finds it uncomfortable when she sees men read. It's not done, and she doesn't see it often. She only sees it here because I think it's the captain of the ship reads, and that's really weird. Oh, she's not happy with that. That's weird to her. Men learn glyphs. That's fine. Those are manly, they're simple, they're easy, it's almost like looking at a picture. But actual reading and writing, that's a feminine thing. She's non-confrontational, she goes quiet in large crowds, she's seen by her brothers as timid, but she always has those responses that she has to bite down on. You get the sense she'd probably have a lot of fun if she didn't feel the need to stick to those social hang-ups that she's been raised with. She's got long red hair and pale skin, in an era where that's ugly. Well, not ugly exactly, but it's certainly not in fashion. Alethi tan skin is what's in fashion right now, and she's got freckles, and we get reminders that she's beautiful. The captain Brandon calls her beautiful, somebody else calls her beautiful, but she has no luck with men. They give her a wide berth, they steer clear of her, which made me concerned, all of the above, that what we might have here is a little bit of a Mary Sue character. So I was glad to see that he gave her those prejudices to balance it out. It gives her a lot of room to grow on the road to perhaps getting rid of those prejudices, or maybe not. We all have our prejudices and some of them we'll never be able to get rid of, and maybe that's what's going to happen here, because Brandon's keen on creating a realistic world and making sure he populates it with people who realistically could live in it. Shallan's calling is natural history, and a calling is a super important thing in Vorin culture. You pick a calling and you work really hard at that. It's your calling now. You'd better live up to it. And since we're talking about Vorin culture, I might as well mention the safe hand thing. We've all heard about how in Victorian England it was absolutely unheard of for a woman to show her ankles. Ooh, well, this is the equivalent of that in this world. They cannot show their safe hand. That's their left hand, by the way. Maybe it's because they write with their right hands, in which case, are we in a world where everyone is right-handed, or are we in a world where everyone is forced to be right-handed? Because, again, we lived in that world up until very recently, and it doesn't matter how high or low-born you were. The bawdy lower classes, who do things unbeseeming of a high-born lady like Shallan, they sometimes just wear a glove. But it's interesting, isn't it? They don't just go around, you know, without covering up their hands. No, they still cover it up. They wear a glove. But that is seen as extremely raunchy. Well, there's no, I didn't see an implication that it's in a sexual sort of a way. It just isn't done. Ladies keep their hands in it's like the end of their sleeve is done up, and it's big, and it kind of hangs down, and it's, you know, it's sewn up, and it doesn't have an opening, so they've got their hand tucked away there, and they've also got a pouch in there, a little safe pouch where they keep things. Can't remember if that's mentioned in this chapter. Ooh, maybe I'm jumping ahead. Doesn't matter though, it's not a spoiler or anything. Oh, it's buttoned shut, apparently, according to my notes. So she wants to be Jasna's ward, so she wrote off to her saying, "Can I be your ward?" And Jasna, to everybody's surprise, replied, "Yeah, if you want, see you in 2 weeks." Oh, okay, okay. But Jasna's really hard to catch up to. She's all over the place and she can't really be tracked down very easily, but Shallan reckons she's done it. She reckons she's in this city of bells, Kharbranth. So what have we learned about Kharbranth, this city of bells? Well, it's a small and, quote, politically fragile city-state open to all. A Vorin kingdom, but with the suggestion that it's basically independent. It's a coastal town built in a wedge shape up a really steep incline, with the wide end facing the sea, so it goes up to a point up the mountain, basically. Talk about what's at the top in a moment. The buildings are blocky, square-windowed, built of creme, perhaps? And we don't know what creme is yet, but it's the sort of thing that you would build primitive buildings out of, because she can't tell if they're built of mud, or daub, remember daub from school, wattle and daub, or creme. So it's that sort of thing, creme. And they're all painted bright colours, orange and red mainly, but there's a couple of blue ones, there's a couple of yellow ones. The perfect setting for a memorable scene in an Uncharted game. The shops are colour-coded depending on what kind of shop it is. Violet for clothing, green for food. And now we get to the bells, the titular bells of the City of Bells. They're not kidding when they call it the City of Bells. There's bells everywhere. Everything's got bells on it here. Absolutely everything. There's bells absolutely everywhere. So there's always this kind of light jingling sound. And this is clever twofold. Firstly, it's just really nice. It's a really good idea for a seaside town. It really sparks the old imagination. It's a perfect setting for a fantasy story. You know, here you have this town, you're going up steep roads, there are colourful buildings all around you, bells on everything, bells on buildings, bells over doors, bells on carts going up and down these roads, light jingling sounds absolutely everywhere you go. Lovely. Isn't that great? Lovely. Reason number two that it's clever is that it fits entirely in with this idea of storms. We've already heard a bit about the fact that there are high storms in this world. We've learned that the grass sucks itself into the ground whenever anything is approaching, because, you know, it's evolved to do that when a high storm is coming. And now we learn that here's this town that's so proud of the fact that it's in a safe area, protected by the mountain or whatever, by its positioning, that it can afford to have bells everywhere, and you can hear at all times that there's no high storm going on. You know, it's sort of a way of showing off. And of course, if a high storm did come in, then, well, you'd hear it coming. And up at the top of the city, at the pointed end of the wedge, is the Conclave. A huge white painted palace carved directly into the rock. And the Conclave is where the king lives. And we meet a chap called Yalb, who works for the captain. I think he's just one of the guys from the ship. And he's tasked with taking Shallan up through the city so she doesn't have to do it alone. Now, to my mind, or rather to my mouth, Yalb is an easier word to say than Tvlak was, but Shallan brings it up as being tricky for her to say in her accent. Why were Thalens so fond of mashing letters together without proper vowels? Couple more interesting mentions of Parshmen here, which are worth lingering on. Don't know if you noticed them. Parshmen were thick-witted. Here we go, there's that little prejudice that she has. I mean, for all we know, it may literally be true, but of course, we recognise it as just the sort of prejudice that people in our world have, so let's call it a prejudice. But they made excellent workers, never complaining, always doing as they were told. Her father had preferred them to ordinary slaves. Okay, so they're not the only people that anyone can be a slave. Well, I suppose we know that because Kaladin is one, but then he was being taken to somewhere outside Alethi borders so that the slave rules wouldn't apply to him. But here we have confirmation that you can have slaves that aren't parshmen as well as ones that are. And then we get this. Were the Alethi really fighting parshmen out on the Shattered Plains? That seemed so odd to Shallan. Parshmen didn't fight, they were docile and practically mute. Of course, from what she'd heard, the ones out on the Shattered Plains, the Parshendi they were called, were physically different from normal Parshmen, stronger, taller, keener of mind. Perhaps they weren't really Parshmen at all, but distant relatives of some kind. So, if we're paying attention, we're piecing together little bits and pieces about this war in the place called the Shattered Plains. Remember that that's where Kaladin originally wanted to go, because it's where the king is fighting the Parshendi, who were the people who had King Gavilar assassinated by Seth in the prologue. Here we're finding out that in the Alethi world, Parshmen are kept as slaves, and they're thought of as perfect slaves because they never complain, they do what they're told, they're quite nice about it, or at least quiet. You know, in modern parlance, kind of robots. And now we hear that out on the Shattered Plains are warrior versions of them who are completely different, and you can't help but wonder, well, does that mean that the Parshmen are the ones that have been sort of broken, either culturally some time ago in history, or individually as an ongoing project? Either way, I don't think we're supposed to be comfortable with it. Hope not, I'm not. And we're back to what I was saying before, you know, despite having a terrible prejudice of the sort that if someone in our world had it, we would think of them as nothing short of a villain. Don't misunderstand what Brandon's doing here. He's not presenting a racist character and saying that we should approve of that. He's presenting a likeable character with big flaws based on the culture that she comes from. And anyone who's feeling a bit dodgy about this can be rest assured, because I've read ahead, that these are prejudices which we're going to find out are ingrained to the Alethi culture, but which it is possible to step away from if you are a good enough dude. And we're going to meet a good enough dude. So she's led up to the Conclave to see if she can track down Jasnar Kholin in there and be made her ward. The start of an exciting new life for this girl. She's going to learn so much, she's going to save her family, and good times are going to be had. What could possibly go wrong? And along the way we found out some stuff about the local culture, including my favourite detail, and that is the currency that they have here. Their currency is marbles with glowing jewels in the middle of them. Okay? Do you need to hear any more, or is this simply the best money that anyone's ever thought of for any story ever? Right? Marbles with jewels in them that glow 'cause they're magic is the currency. Magic glowing marble jewels, whoops, whoops, whoops. Marbles and jewels are two of the key things that we forget are really, really good as we grow up and society tells us to try and be big, strong men and all that, but they're great. And what Brandon's done here is he has A, recognised that, and B, put them together into one wonderful thing. I don't think they're little like normal size marbles, I think they're about that sort of size, like a quite big one. And they've got glowing magical jewels inside, because that's cool and wonderful and all of that. Whoa, maybe a bit smaller than that, that's quite a big one, hang on. About that. Is that a bit too small? I don't know. I'm not really sure exactly how big they are. I just know that they're all about the same size as each other. The difference in size comes from the jewel inside the marble. Well, not marble, it doesn't say marble, it says spheres. But you know, they're glass spheres, those are marbles. And depending on the size and type of the gemstone, what you've got there is a different denomination. And the point is their ability to be infused with stormlight. If you've got a glowing jewel inside your marble, then it is infused with stormlight. It doesn't have to be, it's still legal tender if it isn't, but generally speaking, you're going to want it to be infused and to be glowing with light, because A, that's the point of it. The point of it is its ability to be infused, so, you know, you're going to want to infuse them so that you can prove that you've got a real one and not just like a fake one that can't be infused. Otherwise, you might have to go through some rigmarole to prove that what you've got is real gemstones in the first place. And the number one reason, actually, I'm swapping their order around. The number one reason you're going to want to infuse the gems inside your marbles with magical glowing stormlight is because then you'll have marbles with gems in them that are glowing with magical stormlight. Denominations include a chip. That is a fine, tiny splinter of diamond. It glows only faintly. 5 chips make a mark. Marks glow slightly less brightly than a candle. And then the highest denomination of spheres is a brome, which glows with the light of several candles. And these are the ones used as lights in rich establishments, probably like in the prologue, where Seth was drawing in stormlight from them. Remember? And this is where we start to put things together. The gems that were lighting the hall in the prologue, where Seth was going, oh, what a stupid use of such an amazing thing as stormlight, just lighting this hallway, those were stormlight infused gems, probably inside marbles. Look, this is a weird one, I don't know if you can see this, but it looks silver, but if you get it from the right angle, see, it's actually not. I don't know how it works. Diamond seems to be the lowest denomination, and emerald is the highest, because it can be used by soulcasters to make food. Soulcasters? Looks like we're going to have to get into the notes I made about the we learn in this chapter. But first of all, let me give you my response to the chapter as a whole, apart from just the thing about the money, which I flipping love. Well, first of all, something I noticed that pertains to the above is that these chapters are interesting, but in a slow way. The pace has really slowed down since those early chapters, and we're learning about the world, but never without something interesting going on with the characters. What's happened here is that with that action-packed opening, Brandon has shown us that his book is going to have in it sort of high octane. I just knocked the camera a little bit, sorry about that, continuity fans. No, continuity fans will like that, because I told them why the angles changed slightly. Okay, great. Hi, continuity fans. With those opening chapters, specifically the one with the assassin, Brandon has shown us that there are going to be high-octane action scenes in this story, in which magic and other cool stuff like that, such as magic armor and magic swords, are going to be used to do cool stuff. Having taken that on board as a sort of a promise for the story ahead, the pace can now slow down a bit, and we can sort of learn about the world a bit, and the characters and so on, because we know that it's going to get back to all the cool stuff with the armor and the swords, you know, eventually, so we don't mind pausing a little bit and having a break in pace to just sort of throw a marble around. Sorry about this, it's very addictive. Get a ball, throw it around, it's fun. Well, I found myself enjoying this pace just as much as the... Well, when I read this chapter the first time, I found that Brandon's plotting had worked, and I mean that in the sense of scheming, and also in the sense of, you know, the sorting out the plot for the story, because I was happy to slow down the pace and explore the world a bit more, especially when it's a lovely town full of bells at the seaside, where everyone has marbles with glowing jewels in them for money, because I love that, but I wasn't 100% sure if I would remain happy to stay at that pace, because there was one thing that I'd heard about the book in reviews, which specifically came from UK reviewers. A number of different UK reviewers said that the first half of the book drags and gets boring. And the reason they said that is that here in the UK, as I mentioned before, the book is split in two. You get Way of Kings Part 1 and Way of Kings Part 2, and it's split presumably straight down the middle. And what that means, of course, is that because this was written as one book, it throws the plotting off a bit, which is one of the reasons why I was determined to get the single volume version. Because in a book this long, even though you can expect interesting things to happen along the way, if looked at in an overall sense, what you've got here is build up, 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 actual stuff. Which means that in the UK edition, book 1 is just build up, build up, build up, build up, build up, nothing. I mean, something. There are little sort of climaxes and resolutions and so on along the way, but I'm guessing that someone reading the two books together would be far more satisfied with the ending to book 2 than they would be with the ending to book 1, and they'd wonder why it took up so much of the book. So I went into this wary, or aware, I should say, that it was possible that I might find the first half of the book to sort of drag and you know, maybe get a bit boring, and I didn't. So if you're reading the book along with these videos, then perhaps you have that to look forward to, although maybe me doing these videos slowly will mean that you find it boring. Anyway, point is, it gives us the opportunity, if we are willing, to just actually sink into and live in this world for a while and not worry about the things, the exciting things, the fights and stuff that are going to have to happen later on. For now, we can just live here, we can just explore a town full of bells and look at these little marbles with the jewels in them, because we have been promised by the book that if we stick with it and we keep learning about all this stuff, then it's going to build and resolve, and we'll realise why we had to be taught all that stuff. And, you know, he could just info dump it all on us. He could just have 2 or 3 chapters of characters saying, well, as you know, we live in a world where we have these little marbles and there are big storms that come in. But no, this way he can, you know, let the information flow into us as we spend time in the place that it pertains to. So let's do that. Let's relax. Let's live here for a while and see what happens around us. If memory serves, it's actually not going to be a long time before interesting things start to happen anyway. But keep reading and you'll find out, won't you? And do let me know in the comments and all of that, of course. Before we go, let's have a look at the notes that I wrote down about what we learn in this chapter about the world, and we'll see if there's anything else worth mentioning here. A Lethkar is a Vorin kingdom. Vorin is the word for the people who sort of run the place round here, the highborn people and all of that, and because this is an epic fantasy, we're going to be meeting a lot of them as probably the main cast. Certainly Shallan is one of them, and she is addressed, at least by the captain of the ship, as Brightness, which is a form of address for people of a certain station, sort of similar to Highness, but possibly applicable to people not quite as royal as that. So Tosbek calls Shallan Brightness, for instance. There are things called Ardents in this world. They are men who read That doesn't seem to be all they do. We're going to find out more about who they are as we go on, but they are an exception to the men don't read rule. Even Shallan wouldn't mind seeing a man read if he was an Ardent, for example. Jar Keved is where Shallan comes from, it's a Vorin kingdom. Jasnar Kholin, who we are in search of, is one of the most powerful women in the world, and one of the most infamous as well. The only member of a faithful royal house to be a professed heretic. She's 34, she's super intelligent, she would already have obtained the cap of a master scholar if it wasn't for her vocal denunciations of religion. Specifically, she renounced the devotaries, or devotaries, the various religious congregations that proper Vorin people join. In other words, church. In other words, she's a bit of an opponent of organised religion. Natanatan is a place where the people, or at least the men, have bluish skin and wear gloves. Sky eels? They're eels in the sky. Soul casters. We don't know what they are yet. It doesn't tell us in this chapter. All we know is that they can make food using emerald spheres. There is a high priest called Valam, who is the Bright Lord to whom House Davar, or Davar, or Davar, gives fealty. Valam protects them from their enemies, which, thanks to Shallan's dad, is everyone. There's a detail in the history of Kharbranth that sounds like it's the sort of thing we ought to bear in mind, and it goes like this. Kharbranth had been founded way back into the Shadow Days, years before the Last Desolation. Okay, hold on. So, there was something called the Last Desolation, before that is called the Shadow Days, and that is when this town was founded. That would make it old. Thousands of years old. Created before the terrors of the hierocracy, before, even, the Recreants. We don't know what the hierarchy is yet, we don't know what the Recreants is yet, but we know that they happened since the Last Desolation, which was thousands of years ago, and pretty much as long ago as anyone remembers anything. Back when Voidbringers with bodies of stone were said to have stalked the land. Oh dear! We remember things stalking the land with bodies of stone, don't we? They had rib-like protrusions, didn't they? And far too long limbs and stuff. Oh. And there we go! I think that's all I've got for this chapter, so bye then, and what's the next chapter, I wonder? The next chapter is Chapter 4, The Shattered Plains! We're finally going to the Shattered Plains, where it's all going on! Look, there they are, they're shattered, look at them! That's where the men with the swords stand and fight the Parshendi and all of that, and the king is and all of that! That'll be exciting, going to the Shattered Plains. Right, so bye, I'll see you at the Shattered Plains.